Good evening, everybody. We are still on Zoom tonight with Radical because owing to a health scare with Chris and a COVID scare, we had to pull the class, and we've decided not to try and go back to class this month. We're going to do it in the middle of March instead. So I put the dates on that in the chat for anybody who'd like to go to a live class on the moon, which is an Arapaho Plains Indian myth that was analysed by Lévi-Strauss in his book, third volume of Mythologiques, The Origin of Table Manners. This is a very excellent workshop. It's excellent to do in a live class. But Chris is going to try some innovative technology to see if he can work out. Well, your interactive participation is encouraged for this one, and don't feel stupid about anything. Just have a go. So, Chris, take it away. Why are we interested in the Wives of Sun and Moon? Tell us about it.
Well, it really is the central myth of the third volume, which is kind of the central volume, and actually the best volume of the 4-volume Mythologique. Mythologique itself is by far and away the most ambitious, magnificent attempt to decode kind of world mythology, although in fact Lévi-Strauss was reasonably rigorous in sticking to North and South America, looking at about 1,000 myths. Nobody can study mythology without starting out really from Lévi-Strauss. I mean, you know, and there's been some absolutely fabulous work done using Lévi-Strauss's methods. Now, this particular story gives the title to the third volume, which is called The Origin of Table Manners. And it's a kind of extraordinary myth. In my own view, if you do what Lévi-Strauss urges, which is to treat these stories as crystallized collective intelligence, I mean, treat these stories with respect. Sometimes the incidents seem absurd. Sometimes you get one absurdity after another. But the absurdities are really there for a reason. In a very profound sense, all myths are extended metaphors, and they are critically important. There's a reason why every detail is there. And my own view is that we can learn more about the entire history of kinship ever since Homo sapiens emerged on this planet from this single myth than from all the multiple textbooks and theories and stuff that anthropologists have come up with over the decades. This one myth kind of says it all. But the critical point is that you have to do one or two things which Lévi-Strauss urges. First of all, recognize these stories know what they're talking about. They don't hop and jump from one topic to another sort of arbitrarily. And every detail, if it seems a bit puzzling, what you need to do is realize that you're the problem. You need to work it out. It's not silly. The detail, it may seem a bit strange. It's your job to figure it out what it must mean with this sort of constraint, which is that the stories are kind of consistent. There's a logical thread running from beginning to end of every story. They don't just hop about arbitrarily, even though sometimes they seem to. Now, having said all that, and that's kind of what, you know, sort of bowing the knee to Lévi-Strauss, it's also true that in this particular case, as in so many other cases, Lévi-Strauss's problem was that he approached all these stories with a peculiarly one-sided, ultra-patriarchal view of their source. He thought that culture itself, language, culture, morality, everything that makes us human was invented entirely by men. Women had no agency. And the first structures of kinship from which emerged mythology and ritual were the work of men. So the men essentially in different groups kind of realized that the way in which to develop relationships between one another in their different groups was to use women as kind of pawns, exchange tokens between one another. So a bunch of women a bunch of men here would surrender their sisters and daughters to another bunch of men somewhere else, who'd in turn surrender their sisters and daughters. So you get what he called the exchange of women. And he made it very clear, he actually explicitly stated this, women had no agency in this. Women were purely instruments in the plans, the matrimonial plans and alliances of men. And all I can say is that, okay, that's an interesting theory. The trouble is, if you try to apply that theory to the myths, it just causes endless problems. And in the end, very unfortunately, nobody can quite work out what Lévi-Strauss concluded. I mean, he was attempting to tell us that all these myths were variations on a theme. The final chapter of the final volume, The Naked Man, was one myth only. Everything was supposed to have come clear, and yet there was a huge disappointment in the 60s and 70s. What exactly is the underlying structure of all these stories? And beyond a few very abstract formulations, the main one being to be or not to be, which is extremely disappointing. Unfortunately, not a lot was there. And my own view was immediately, as soon as I started reading his stories, I just thought, right, the thing to do is to realize that what's wonderful about Lévi-Strauss is that his theory isn't just slightly wrong in bits, wrong in places. It's beautifully, completely upside down. And the methodology, the metaphor I used was a piece of old-fashioned film. If all the black bits should be white and all the white bits should be black, you've got the whole picture. You just need to reverse it. And essentially, reversing Lévi-Strauss's model of the origins of culture gives you a far better model. And then you suddenly see that the myths make extraordinary sense, provided you follow the rest of his recommendations about respecting them, assuming in advance that they're logical and coherent, and so forth. So now this particular story, The Wives of the Sun and the Moon, is the myth of a very well-known ritual. Most people who've even a vague familiarity with cowboy films will have heard of the sun dance. The sun dance was in fact a Plains Indian ritual, Arapaho being one of the Plains Indian groups, of course. And in fact, it wasn't a sun dance at all, it was a rain dance. But what happened is that the performers of the sun dance, at least the men, there's plenty of women as well involved, but the men would stare at the sun and bleed in an attempt to kind of cancel or negate the excessive power of the sun, to prevent the sun from remaining too hot and too dry for too long, to bring on the rain. So really the sun dance ought to have been called a rain dance. And this story is the story of the rain dance or the sun dance. Okay, so I'm going to try and tell the story, first of all, in a very brief form, purely from memory. I'm going to stop myself from reading anything because it'll be easier for you. So we don't exactly have once upon a time. It's not a fairy tale from Europe, but it's the same idea. Once upon a time, there were two brothers up in the sky, one the sun and the other the moon. And they were having a discussion up there. And the discussion was about getting married. Up to now, the sun and moon, the two brothers, had been mobile. They've been moving to and fro, and were very often away from home, away from their aging parents. And they're aware of their parents needing a bit more support. And so the two brothers decided to spend more time at home, settle down a bit by getting married. And so they were discussing the kind of women they would be looking for. And women come in two kinds. You've got toad women who are incontinent and ugly and lazy. And on the other hand, you've got human women who are also called resurrected women. And these are hardworking, very attractive, and fertile. And so they're having a discussion, and you would expect, and in fact the story kind of expects us to anticipate, that the toad wife would go with the moon, because toads are wet. It's not quite clear whether she's a toad or a frog. That it tends to be a bit interchangeable in the translations, but they're wet creatures and dark creatures, and ought to go with moon. and a resurrected, dry woman, if you like, a human woman, should go with Sun. But what happened is that Moon had heard Sun commenting as follows. And Sun had said, well, when human women look at me, they squint, they screw up their eyes, and they look ugly. And of course, when you think about that, it makes a lot of sense. If you're the sun looking down at Earth, and you're looking at women who happen to look up towards you, you're the sun, of course, they're going to be dazzled by you, and they're going to screw up their eyes to stop getting, it's very painful to keep your eyes open. Whereas frogs and toads, they're lovely because they don't seem to shut their eyes and they look lovingly at you. So anyway, Sun had made that comment, and Moon overheard it. So Moon decided, okay, you remember you said that you really quite attracted towards toads because they don't squint at you. Well, I know. Why don't you you take a toad wife and I'll make do with a human. So the trick worked, and so when they went down to Earth, that was the decision they both made. And Moon goes down to Earth, and they both, by the way, they both go down to Earth around the time of the dark moon. There's 6 days after the moon disappears before the new moon makes its appearance. And in the story it says there's 2 days of rest, but they go down in that period. And Moon lures, he goes down to see a beautiful camp, circular camp down on Earth, and some gorgeous girls are collecting firewood. He's very attracted towards one of them. He turns himself into a porcupine because the people like to use the porcupine quills for their cloaks. So he appears as a beautiful porcupine and starts climbing up a tree, and it works. The trick works. The girl starts following him, and he climbs and climbs and climbs up into the sky. This kind of gives us an idea that we have a variation here on a very familiar theme in all these myths, the bird nester theme, the movement from Earth to sky. So he climbs up the sky higher and higher and higher until he reaches a hole in the sky, and he lures the young woman through the hole. And once he's on top, up in the sky, he's very careful to block up the hole. He takes a potato plant and stops up the hole in the sky so that his human wife can't get back home again. He's up in the sky, and his parents are pleased about the wife he's got. Later on, rather reluctantly, because she doesn't seem to want to come on her own steam, the toad wife appears, and she's hopping along, and she's squirting because she's incontinent, and she hops along, and the brother's parents are a bit puzzled by the toad woman, but they decide to give her just as warm a welcome as the human woman. So now both wives are up in the sky, and the toad wife is not only ugly and incontinent, but she refuses to do any work. It's as if she's on strike. She stays indoors. She lies on a bench with her back to everybody and refuses to do anything at all. Whereas the other wife, the human wife, is very diligent, and she's happy to be told how to do the gardening, how to use a hoe, how to plant the plants, and do everything properly. So they're happy with their human daughter-in-law, the parents, but they still remain a bit anxious. For one thing, they need the human wife to prove that she's got teeth in her mouth strong enough and sharp enough to make musical notes, while eating boiled tripe. And of course, the listeners to this story will be in fits of laughter here, because it is actually very difficult to make loud, crackling musical notes while eating boiled tripe. But that's the test that she's set. And she passes this test splendidly. She's got beautiful teeth, they're very strong, they make these musical notes. Whereas the toad wife completely fails. She tries to cheat. She sticks charcoal in her mouth to make a crackling sound, but instead of any sound coming out of her mouth, all that comes out from the corners of her mouth are flows of liquid, black liquid dribbling out from her mouth. Suddenly and unexpectedly, the human wife gives birth to a baby. It's very strange because the human wife didn't seem to be having any pregnancy, but birth she just comes out with. And everyone's congratulating her on this baby, while aware that the that the toad wife doesn't seem to maybe the toad wife seems to have been pregnant quite a bit and quite messy, but didn't produce a baby. So while everyone's congratulating the human wife, the Moon, and you remember Moon was quite pleased to be shot of this particular wife. He managed to trick the sun into having her. Moon starts to laugh at her, and she's scorned and humiliated, and in her fury at being scorned, she leaps onto the Moon and vows to stay there forever. And if you look up at the Moon, full moon, you can still see the spots on the Moon, which to the Arapaho are the shape of a pregnant toad. So she's still there. So now the end of the story. Despite passing one test after another, the human wife is accused by her father-in-law of lacking any sense of timing. She seems to give birth suddenly and without warning. And so her father-in-law sets out on a program of education to teach her how to give birth and to menstruate on time. So rather than interpret it, I think it's much straight away. I think it's much better if we try to go back over the story so that all of you who've been listening just make sure you've all got it in your heads. I don't know if you want to organize this part of it, Camilla. So I mean, how did the story begin? And then perhaps over to you, Camilla, to ask questions. All we want to do now is just get the sequence, get the story, and repeat it, all of you.
We've got a story about two brothers, the sun and moon, and they're deciding to come down from the sky, going in kind of two separate directions to find women, to find their brides. And the reason that they want to do this is that they have been coming and going and kind of disappearing off and coming back, but they want to look after their elderly parents, and so they want to get married and settle down. That's how it starts. And then it goes into, what's the next bit? Somebody else want to say something about it? What's the conversation between the sun and the moon? What's it about? Anybody else?
Discussion about preferred forms of wife.
Such as?
Well, the main thing is the sun's comment that he doesn't like human wives because they squint when they look up at him.
Mm-hmm.
And he'd much prefer a frog wife because they don't squint.
Yep.
And Moon overhears this and thinks he'll exploit it.
Right. So Moon's playing a trick on the sun here by saying, oh, well, I'll just make do with the human wife, but you can have one of the toad wives. And okay. So what do they do exactly? Where do they go? What do they do? Anybody?
Abhijit, come on.
Or any of Annie or people who've heard this before.
They come down to earth, don't they? And go off in search of their respective partners.
All right, so what's Moon's technique?
He disguises him, he changes into a porcupine, which porcupine quills were used for the most valued sort of clothing.
Yeah.
So he knew that he'd attract the women's attention that way.
Mm-hmm.
And sure enough, he does. And so he starts climbing a tree, and the woman follows.
Mm-hmm.
And he climbs and climbs and climbs until he gets to this hole in the sky, and the woman follows him through, and he plugs the hole with a potato plant, so she can't get back.
Yeah.
Can I just say that all these stories are kind of illustrations of what it means to get stuck. And that's, of course, really the main theme of The Dawn of Everything. And because we're thinking that these myths address that problem, we've called this whole series of talks on mythology The Real Dawn of Everything. But as Ian said, this human wife, she goes into the other world through the hole in the sky. And the reason she gets stuck is because her husband, the moon, blocks up the hole, preventing her from getting back down to her kin. So she's stuck up with her in-laws. What happens next? Anyone remember? What happens to the frog wife? Is she keen to get up there?
Toad wife.
Frog wife, yes, all right. Let's try and keep consistency, I agree. Let's call her the toad. Yeah, I know, yeah.
Apparently they're all toad wife like? Anybody, somebody.
Lévi-Strauss calls them batrachians to get around the toad frog problem. Apparently they're all batrachians or batrachians, but I didn't want to use that term. So what about her?
Well, she's not playing at all. She's not going to do anything. She's turning her back on the party, and you know, she's really not playing the part in at all, and being presumably a good guest, a gracious guest.
She's not being a good wife at all, and no. also she's quite reluctant to come up. She didn't follow anyone up. She didn't follow the sun up through a hole in the sky. Rather, her mother-in-law had to come down and fetch her, and she was seen to be very reluctant to be there at all, let alone be a good wife when she's up there. So well done, yes. Yeah, okay, so she's, I mean, the word I use, it's not quite in Lévi-Strauss, is that she's on strike. I mean, she's on sex strike, cooking strike, work strike, gardening strike. She's just completely non-cooperative. So I like to think of her as being on strike.
But how is she treated?
Yes, does anyone remember that funny little detail about how she's going to be treated by her in-laws? She will be given just as
warm a welcome.
Just as a warm a welcome as the other one. So can you just see how sort of significant that is? I mean, the in-laws...
Even when she's incontinent, leaving wet patches wherever.
It's as if the in-laws, they feel, well, come on, you know, we're in favour of this whole system. We've got to put up with her. There's no, you know, we can't let her go back. We've got to keep her, even if she is lazy and incontinent and messy and every other damn thing. So they give her just as good a welcome, a warm as welcome. That's thank you, Camilla, as the other one. But despite that, nothing they say, nothing they do, no amount of encouragement can get her to lift a finger. Right, okay, now what's the next thing? I mean, the contrast, of course, this was with the human wife. So what kind of work does the human wife do? And we're going to go into the significance of these things later, but let's just get the details, just the sort of raw material of the story first.
Gardening.
She does gardening. And I think in particular, it's potatoes, as far as I can see, because I did read at one stage the original, not Lévi-Strauss's version, but the original Dorsey version from the turn of the century, and potatoes were kind of very, very popular among the Arapaho in this period. So yes, now suddenly something happens. Oh yes, that's right.
First of all, she's got to do a test. Yes,
that's right. So for some reason, despite her doing this work, the human woman, there's still a lot of anxieties, especially on the part of the father-in-law. He has all sorts of anxieties, which to a Westerner coming from a completely different place, you'd think, what on earth are they worried about? But once you come from the culture itself, you realize that there's method in the madness. You can have very profound worries with very, solid grounds. Now, their worry is that, can anyone remember that the human wife won't be able to do something?
Keep time. She's not, that she's got poor timing because she's suddenly given, made this baby without, it being announced or visible that she was pregnant.
That's very good.
That is true. That is true.
And before that, there's another sort of premonition of that lack of timing. There's another thing which is not good at doing, which actually is connected.
The test.
The test, yes. She's got to be tested in something. And what is the test? Do you remember?
Whistling while eating tripe.
Say it again.
Whistling while eating boiled tripe.
It's not exactly whistling, but certainly making musical notes. It's actually, she's got to make sounds with her teeth, apparently. She's got a very strong, sharp teeth. And while eating boiled tripe, in some versions, she's got to make loud cracking sounds. But actually, the problem is she's not making musical notes. That's very clear in the specifications of the Sundance, which is the ritual reenactment of the story. She's got to make musical sounds with her teeth while eating boiled trout. So anyway, what's the result?
Does everybody know what tripe is like, and how easy it is to make
Menudo.
crackling sound?
Yeah, menudo
Impossible.
soup is
Depends how it's prepared. If it's prepared by old people, they don't get the dirty stuff inside out, so it can be quite bitter.
Oh, I see. Right, thank you, Denise. That's very interesting. But is it easier to chew on it while making loud cracking sounds?
not easy to chew on it while doing anything.
So, as a child, we often had tripe, and I agree. It's a sort of jelly stuff, and it really is. There's no way you can make loud cracking sounds, let alone musical notes, by chewing on boiled tripe. So it's really quite a test. But anyway, she passes the test with flying colours. And what about the frog wife?
Not so much.
Not so much at all.
Not so much. Nope.
No, she seems to have,
But what does she do? She tries to cheat. How?
Yeah, she turns it black.
She uses charcoal, no? Or
Puts charcoal in her mouth and just really makes a messy dribble.
she might have thought that by putting charcoal in her mouth, she could crackle it and make a nice sound, but it didn't work. And all that happens is that out of the corners of her mouth comes this black dribble. So soon we're going to be interpreting all these symbols, and it won't be difficult. But anyway, there you are. Now we get to the next bit, and let's just repeat that. We had it just now, the surprise.
Oh, the unannounced, non-visible baby production.
Yep.
Well done, exactly. So without any menstruation, any pregnancy, suddenly a baby appears. And of course, they're all very pleased about it, but they think, well, what kind of sense of timing have you got? So you can't just suddenly present us with a baby like out of nowhere. But they're happy. But one person isn't happy.
Why not?
Who's most unhappy about all this? Extremely unhappy.
Father-in-law.
Well, the father-in-law is unhappy about the lack of timing, but sorry, yes, that's perfectly correct. Sorry, yes, you're perfectly correct. But right on the spur of the moment, yes, the frog is not at all happy about all this congratulation, all this celebration of this wretched human wife who seems to produce a baby without really any effort. I mean, without all the menstruation, and all the pregnancy and all that stuff. So just, here we are, we've got a baby. She's not at all happy about that. And then when Moon scorns her, laughs at her, we now get a very familiar motive in mythology, which is, what does she do? With all that black dribble, or all that incontinence, what does she do?
She jumps on the moon and stays there and kind of gets settled into what I thought of the moon's spots.
This is a very complex, rich version of the myth that Lévi-Strauss says all these stories begin with. Because he says, if you wanted to start with one simple story, and it's a story which can't vary at all widely, it's always going to be pretty much the same, the beginning, the middle, and the end. It's not much scope of variation. It's the origin of the spots on the moon. And this is a story of a woman who's in her menstrual hut in seclusion, and she's visited by a lover. And she doesn't know who it is because it's dark in there, but someone's having sex with her. And in the morning, she notices that there's only one person out of all the young men in the area who've got stains all over them, blood stains or dark Jennifer juice stains. So that he's the one, and everyone's outraged because he's her brother, and they chase and chase and chase the miscreant, who climbs up a tree, up, until he finally fixes himself in the sky, and there he is with all those spots covering his face. So this is you can see how this is a variation on that theme. So this whole story is a number of different myths combined into one brilliant, sequential, wonderfully logical single story. But anyway, that's what she does. And now we just get the conclusion, and the conclusion is quite quick, and that's the second dissatisfied person, who, as we've just heard, is the father-in-law, and he is particularly dissatisfied with lack of timing. And the human wife seems to have no sense of timing at all. And so what does the father-in-law do? He sets on a program of educating wives, teaching them how to menstruate on time and how to give birth on time. And that's the end of the story. So, I mean, you can argue, I suppose, ideologically, that this is a somewhat patriarchal story, and I suppose it sure is. But shall we go back to the beginning? Camilla, do you want to sort of help organize this, ask the questions which need to be asked about meanings? I mean, Lévi-Strauss doesn't do too much about meanings, but if we don't sort of allocate meanings to symbols, you can't really arrange them at all. So we really need to know, if not the sort of, we're not trying to get, wispy, deep philosophical meanings. We just want to know who sun is, who moon is, who water woman is, or frog woman, and who human woman is, remembering that these stories are about important things. They're really about what it means to be human, actually. You can put it that strongly. So there are profound insights and thoughts in these stories. They're not just about odd little personages here and there. They're much more general, philosophical, and perhaps even historical conclusions reached by the tellers as they tell these stories, at least at some level.
Well, I mean, one question to pose is, what is kind of instantly puzzling? What's the sort of critical puzzle in the story that's kind of cross wires, if you like, that gives it the tension? What would people say is the problematic, if you like?
Okay, that's very good, Camilla. Yes, so let's say, given the very, very, very familiar metaphor, woman's biggest husband is the moon. I mean, we found that everywhere. Yeah. There's a culture in the world where when a woman's menstruating, she isn't with her moon husband. When you're menstruating, traditionally, you're not with your marital partner. You're not with your husband. You're with your moon husband, who is a different character altogether, and he is your own blood. He's your own blood. And that, in fact, the reason you menstruate is the fact is that's because the moon's inside you, causing that blood. So, as Camilla says, we now have when you have a long, complicated myth, and here I think we can agree with Freud. If it's a complicated myth, it's because your poor brain's trying to sort out some deep contradiction. And here, these people are clearly trying to sort out a profound conflict, a profound contradiction. Something's gone profoundly wrong, and they're needing to sort out the consequences and try to find a way of accommodating themselves to this new situation. What has gone wrong? At what point does it go wrong?
When their parents are getting old and they think they need to be looked after. They've been quite happy before, going up and down, visiting women.
That's right. Thank you, Ian. I mean, clearly, can you see how in myths which are about the earth and the sky, they're really about the two worlds which all of us move between. So we're alive in this world, and then we die and we go into the other world. But of course, menstruation is a particular form of death from which you return. So you go to the other world, but you come back. And of course, when we die and then come back again, we're doing what the moon does. The moon knows how to do it. You get death followed by resurrection. So the reason why it's so brilliant in a myth to picture earth and sky as the two places we visit is because it's hard to imagine two things being more different than kinship and marriage, or blood relations, which is the title of my book, and marital relationships. They're as far apart as earth from sky. So when a woman goes into menstrual seclusion, she's as far removed from her husband as a star in the night sky is from, you know, things happening down on this earth. So earth and sky are distant. Actually, in all the world's myths, they kind of start out pretty close, very close sometimes, and they get distance. But that's the language we're using. So now, okay, so we've sort of set the scene that something's happening, and both sun and moon have decided to stay in one place, haven't they? Because they've decided to stay at home with their parents up in the sky, which of course means they've got to go down to the earth and bring their wives up to the sky instead of going up and down, to and fro. So now, who would you expect under normal circumstances? I'm saying normal in the sense of like primordial. And I'm following now Camilla's question. Who would you expect moon to be with out of those two categories of womankind? Frog wife, human wife. Who should moon be with normally, primordially?
Frog wife.
Frog wife. Moon
Frog
is
wife,
wet
yeah.
and dark. Frogs, batrachians, toads, they're wet and dark. Moon, a woman's moon husband, she's with her moon husband when she's a frog or a toad, when she's wet, incontinent, and all those things. In other words, when she's, it seems to be pretty obvious, when she's in menstrual seclusion, she's with a different kind of husband. But what's gone wrong? We know that moon is a trickster, of course, but this particular trick is a disaster, isn't it? Moon has decided to trick the sun into doing things the wrong way around. Now, can you see that if the trick works, if moon is going to be with human woman and sun is going to be with frog woman, and both sun and moon are going to be simultaneously with wives up in the sky in the same household, can you see what has happened? Can you see that you've lost the periodicity? There's no movement.
Perhaps, Chris, we want to clarify for everybody, who are these two women exactly?
Right,
we've
okay.
got two men and we've got two women.
Right,
can we just make that really clear, and do people get this bit?
Let's start at the very, I agree with you. Let's start at the very, very beginning. We've got sun and moon. Now, knowing that these stories are about what it means to be human, they're not about particular characters in a novel, what it means to be human. Why have we got sun and moon? Who are they?
Maybe it's easier to start with the two women.
All right.
And then fit the men.
Okay. Who are frog wife, moon, and versus resurrected wife? Who could they possibly be?
So are they menstruating woman and marital woman? So woman in marriage time and woman on strike.
Well done. So they're not.
So if they get stuck at the same time, as you said, you lose the periodicity. They're there at the same time when they couldn't possibly be.
You cracked the whole story. Thank you.
Yeah,
that's right. You cracked the entire story. There's something has gone terribly wrong. But basically, frog and human are not different people. As you said, they are womankind in her two opposite states. Womankind as sister, or womankind as blood, connected by her blood, therefore her menstrual blood, to her kin. Woman as sister versus womankind in her opposite role as wife to somebody who is not her own blood. I mean, if you're somebody's wife, you can't be the same blood. That would be, of course, incest. So in normal times, particularly with a matrilineal kinship system, a man will be going to and fro, to and fro, to and fro between sister and wife, having sex with his wife, but constantly coming back to his sister for rights in children, religious rights, rights in food and stuff. So to and fro, to and fro. And of course, that means as the man's going to and fro, the woman is experiencing a perpetual alternation between her role as a sister and her role as a wife. Very, very different roles, almost as if there were two people, and almost as if as sister turns into wife, sister's kind of been killed or dying and being replaced by wife, who then in her turn, she dies or disappears at any rate and is replaced by a sister. Now, once we've got that, we should be able to go back the other way and say, in that case, reciprocally, who are sun and moon.
Brother and husband.
That's right. So every man is a brother for a period, and then he's a husband, then he's a brother, then he's a husband. As he moves up and down in the stories between earth and sky, but in terms of kinship terminology, kinship structure between kinship and marriage. And of course, if menstruation is linked with the moon, as all belief systems assume it is, today's scientists always say that's nonsense, but belief systems assume menstruation is the moon, then of course this movement to and fro will be a once a month movement, with women moving back to their kin at dark moon when they menstruate, and at full moon or honeymoon, emerging from seclusion, have romantic times with their marital partner, with their lover. So you get this to and fro movement. And what starts out the whole myth is that something's gone drastically wrong through the trickery of the moon, who sort of wants to have it both ways. And he's now got both types of wife up there in the household, while with his brother, because it's almost as if both aspects of womankind are simultaneously married to both aspects of mankind in the same household, which clearly has meant the negation of any form of periodicity.
No.
Right, we've got some more things to more sort of puzzles, but to me, once you've worked some of these fundamental details out, everything else just immediately falls into place. For example, and I think Ian's more or less anticipated this, but if we sort of say what kind of marriage is being envisaged by the two brothers, and when I say what kind of marriage, you can have matrilocal, you can have patrilocal, you can have duolocal, there's different forms of residence. What's the kind of marriage that is now being inaugurated as a result of Moon's trickery? Or perhaps as a result of both Sun and Moon having decided on something. And there's a very powerful symbol in that to make sure that it's one way and not the other. Sorry?
Permanent marriage.
It's definitely permanent, but in terms of residence, that's absolutely right. It's permanent, but permanently where?
Patrilocal.
Yeah.
And how does Moon make double sure that she's not going to go back home?
Uses a potato to block up things, which sort of tells when this story, or when that detail must have come from, because Arapaho weren't eating potatoes until they were settled by the U.S. government. Well,
exactly. That's the point. So the onset of gardening and reliance on potatoes it enables getting settled, it underlies the fact that they're becoming settled. And what could be a more brilliant clever little metaphor to put everything together in one little moment, the moon blocking up the hole in the sky with a potato plant. I mean, that just says it all in one go. It says that she can't go back home, marriage is patrilocal, and the potato plant is the cause. I mean, it's just so beautiful. These myths, once you understand them and respect them properly, they're so much more clever than textbooks, particularly anthropology textbooks and archaeology textbooks. So, all right, so we've worked that one out. Now, another little detail, which is that, okay, frog wife, toad wife seems to be very reluctant to come up into the other world, and she hops along. Now, the parents decide to give her just as warm a welcome as the other one. Now, what is that describing in terms of patrilocal marriage? This new form of marriage, just as warm a welcome. I mean, you might think, well, okay, she's an ugly toad. Just don't have her. Keep her down below. Now, would that be realistic? Would that work? And is the story being rather intelligent, actually, in saying the opposite, that she's given just as warm a welcome as the other one? We've got Rosalie saying on the chat, which I can't hear, and I can only see the first line of chat. Rosalie, don't you want to say it out loud? All right, doesn't matter.
It's basically that she has to live there all the time, no matter what she's going through.
Thank you so much. Exactly. So if you're in patrilocal marriage and it's permanent marriage, you're a woman. you might agree to go to your husband's place for a while, but you know, when you need to go back to your mum, you want to go back to your mum. I mean, so many cultures, and Camilla was mentioning the Himba a few days ago. You might be patriarchal, you might be living with a husband, but when you're giving birth to your baby, you want to be with your mum. And of course, in other cultures, when you're menstruating, you might feel, well, hang on a bit, my husband's not going to appreciate this. And anyway, I don't feel like being here. I feel like going into seclusion if I'm going to be in seclusion with my relatives, and be treated a bit more respectfully. So you go back to your blood when you're shedding blood, either afterbirth blood through childbirth or menstrual blood. But now that you've got patrilocal marriage, the patrilocal family, the in-laws, you can see, can't you? They've got to accept you, as you've just said, Natalie. They've got to accept you either way. So whatever you're doing, giving birth, menstruating, you know, having sex, whatever it is, you're still going to be in the same place with your husband and his kin. And so you've got to give her just as warm a welcome as the other one. We've explained that bit. Now, of course, now, to me, again, I suppose I shouldn't have done this earlier. I mean, does anyone dispute that the toad wife is on strike? I suppose the only question is, she seems to be always on strike. I mean, she doesn't seem to be periodically on strike, just on strike when she's menstruating. She seems to be on strike the whole time. Can we explain that part of it? Yes, Rosalie's said they're polarized. I mean, can you see that? Yeah, I mean, can I tease that out a bit?
If they're two parts of, you know, if they're seen as two parts of being woman, so they have to be separated into different characters and polarized.
That's exactly it. That's exactly right. Because they're not different people at different times. They're womankind, and Frog is womankind when she's menstruating. So she's womankind when she's on strike. She's womankind when she's not running around after her husband, trying to give him sex, trying to feed him with meals, trying to wash his socks all those times. She's permanently on strike against all those marital duties. And she wants to be back home, but of course she's not allowed back home because this is the whole point of the whole system.
And she's not human. Also, if we go back to what we said in the other ones before, she's not human. She's an animal, so she's kind of morphed into something else because she can't be human because she can't be married.
You're well on it, exactly. As Lévi-Strauss points out throughout the whole of Mythologiques, the way to make yourself distant from your husband is to suddenly turn into an animal. Because human husbands, they really want a female who's of the same species, namely a human, of a different sex, namely a female, and fertile, so not menstruating, fertile right now. So in order to signal no to a male, you really want to metamorphose into the exact opposite on all counts. And this toad woman is doing brilliantly. She's metamorphosing into everything that a husband wouldn't want in the most systematic imaginable way. And so and because, as you've said, she by definition, she's a woman on strike, she's menstruating and not therefore maritally active, therefore, because that situation is permanent, because that's by definition who she is, then her being on strike is a permanent state. Now, remember the interesting details of the story about I mean, basically the human wife is quite the opposite. She's not just not on strike, she's extremely diligent, she's a very good wife, she's very attentive to all the instructions she gets. In Lévi-Strauss's versions, and even more in the full versions that you can look up, Dorsey's versions, there's all sorts of very entertaining and interesting ceremonial paraphernalia about how to plant potatoes and other crops. You have to tap them on the east, the west, the south, the north. You have to do kind of little circle dances around them to make sure they grow. But anyway, the human wife is very good at doing all that ceremonial and doing everything exactly as she's instructed by her in-laws. Now we're getting to the title of the whole volume, The Origin of Table Manners. We're getting to table manners, and we have this extraordinary, I mean, to any narrator of the story, I'm sure absolutely comical, as in any trickster story, comical version of good table manners, which is to make loud noises while crackling boiled tripe with your mouth. Now, but in order to interpret that, we've got to sort of go back a bit to other motifs. And I think the simplest way for me to sort of spark your imagination is to ask you a very simple question. When men in male-dominated societies, I'm talking now about hunter-gatherer societies, horticultural societies, long before, you know, civilizations, when men monopolize ritual power, you're probably all aware that the way they monopolize their power is through monopolizing the sacred instruments which give them ritual power. And these instruments produce noises. They're the sacred trumpets across nearly all of Australia. They're the bull roarers. And you might, or the sacred flutes. The trumpets make a sort of loud farting sound. The flutes make an amazing, they're very big, these flutes usually. They make a very beautiful, haunting sound. And of course, the bull roarers go woo, 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 woo. And that sounds like the sound you heard when you're in your mother's belly. It's the sound of the blood pumping around you. And you hear that sound and you know where you are. You're back in the womb of your mother. Now, the question I'm going to ask is, do any of you know, and by the way, last week with Jack and the Beanstalk, we had a bit of an answer there, but I didn't spell it out. When the male hero who establishes male rule at the expense of the rule of women, when the male hero seizes hold of one of these sound-making instruments, where did he look? Why is he so brave? He's got to go somewhere. It is absolutely unthinkable for a man to go. He's still got to go there and find this noise-making instrument. Where does he find it? Where is it? Where does it come from?
Hello. I guess it could be a menstruating hut.
Yep. I'm sorry, it's as from our point of view, predictable as that. You go into a woman's menstrual hut and you search around for it, and she's probably hidden it under one of her skirts. But it's very, very dangerous for a man to go into a woman's menstrual house, because normally your penis would shrivel up and various other horrible things would happen to you. But some hero managed to do this and get away with it and come back with a sacred sound-making instrument. Just to make the point about Jack and the Beanstalk, you remember Jack, the second time he goes up into the sky, and each time he goes up, he's in a womb. I mean, they're not exactly called wombs, but he's welcomed by the giant's wife. She's the one who protects him. How did she protect him? By putting him in an oven. Now, he's never cooked in that oven, but he smells of blood. Fee, fi, fo, fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman. And what does he take from that oven or womb? He takes, among other things, he takes the goose that lays the golden eggs, obviously a symbol of fertility, but he takes the heart which plays all by itself. And he comes down to earth, having seized this from that hole in the sky, that, if you like, that womb in the sky. So, but in all the world's myths of so-called primitive matriarchy, the place where the man finds the sacred flutes or the bull roarers, because the sound made by those instruments is the sound of the blood itself, therefore the sound of almost the sound of the moon when it's inside a woman, but therefore the place you've got to take it from is that womb. Now, in this story, we have a mouth, but you should immediately see what kind of a mouth it is. I mean, every woman has got a mouth above and a mouth below. And how do we know from the frog wife with her dribbling charcoal what kind of mouth this is? As soon as you realize that the incontinence is menstrual and that the black saliva dribbling out from the corners of her mouth is the same as the spots on the moon, it's a menstrual blood, you can see that that's the mouth below. Therefore, it's from the mouth below that the musical sounds have to come. And now we're getting to the really big question. Why would the in-laws be so anxious about making sure that they got the musical sounds? Because remember, without the musical sounds, you haven't got your ritual potency, and you're not going to make the seasons change. You're not going to be able to perform the rain dance, and therefore you'll suffer from a terrible drought. You need supernatural potency in order to perform your ritual, and critically, you need the sounds of the blood. You need the musical instruments. Why are they worried about the human wife? It's kind of by definition, you would be worried. I mean, I'm not asking anything new. I want you all to be extraordinarily unoriginal, because these myths They say it this way, they say it that way, they say it the other way, and it's consistently. They don't hop around. So I don't want you to say anything new. Yes, Karina Mohideen is said to everyone because she's not menstruating. You'd obviously be very worried if a man was just stuck with his wife, somebody who, and by definition, a wife is somebody who doesn't menstruate, then by definition, you're not going to have any ritual power. And you need to have ritual power. So you've got to somehow persuade yourselves that even the woman who doesn't menstruate, who is the human or resurrected woman who's come out of menstrual seclusion, even she, with her, quote, mouth, use the euphemism, she can produce nice musical notes. And of course, given that this is a patriarchal myth, and given that the conclusions are sort of preordained, I mean, they've got to come out with the right answer, otherwise what's the point of all this? They decided to set her a test. They decided to set her a test which is going to win. And so what happens is that the human wife produces with her mouth musical notes, whereas the frog wife, who's very much scorned, and by the way, the frog wife is every man's sister, and once you've got patrilocal marriage, every man will lose or abandon his sister in favor of his wife, so the sister is now kind of scorned and disowned. So woman as sister, the person that as a man you'd be with when she's menstruating or giving birth, she's now being disowned in favor of woman, the wife, as a permanent wife. She's now very angry, and of course you can see why she would be angry, because all she does now, instead of producing musical notes, she just produces a mess.
So that is a depiction of menstruation as a total nuisance, pollution, with nothing good about it, no power attached to it.
Not even fertility. Not even fertility. In other words, to be fertile and get pregnant and have a baby, you don't need your sister. Now, of course, you can immediately see that in the past you would have needed your sister, because you're in the matrilineal system. Your sister gives you your baby. Your baby is your sister's child, your blood. Wives, you might sort of in our terms get them pregnant, but from a man's point of view, who that baby comes from is not his business. And of course, women go out of the way to construct very elaborate myths to say that babies, wherever else babies come from, they don't come from having sex with your husband. They come from, I won't say from a stork, but I mean, they come from all kinds of dreamtime events and spirit children and all kinds of, all kinds of other places other than sex with a husband. The idiots of anthropology in the 30s used to call it ignorance of paternity, as if people didn't understand the facts of sexual reproduction. It was never ignorance at all. It was a deliberate strategy on women's part to confuse paternity for reasons which we've discussed in other lectures. Okay, now, so that's the
in the story, in this is a real piece of trickery in the story about this noise making.
Yeah.
That they assert that they're saying ideologically that the human wife, she can do it, she can make the noise.
Yeah.
But just when it's happening, there is a big noise, but who makes that noise is in fact the moon, the moon laughing. And it's the moon laughing very out loud, very like big noise that causes the toad wife to do this thing of the splatting herself onto the face of the moon and claiming that I will be with you forever because you scorned me, I will be with you forever. So that is a representation, an assertion of the link of brother and sister.
Well, yeah, well done. So of course, as we all know, you can't really have an ex-sister. You can have an ex-wife, an ex-husband, but there's something about kinship which is forever. And the frog wife is sort of making that assertion. You can just scorn me, you can abandon me, you can leave me, you can denigrate me, but you actually can't get rid of me. And the spots on the face of the moon are sort of evidence of that fact. But yes, Camilla, that's a very nice stuff which didn't get into my thesis. But although Lévi-Strauss makes it very clear the role of laughter is when you open up, and there's all sorts of things about the open and the closed as well as the raw and the cooked, and of course laughter does make a. So this is the moon's laughter, which is answered by the frog in sticking to him with her blood. as you say, as the irremovable sister. You can't get rid of your sister. And another thing to say is that in this volume, there's a whole series of myths called the clinging woman. So it's a repeated motif that there's a clinging woman. You might try to get rid of your sister, and it just as you might try to get rid of the menstruation, but it's sort of, you can't. You can denigrate it, but it will always be there. And as Kim has said, what this is doing is kind of showing how menstruation became what it is under patriarchy, which is not even anymore what it should be for all cultures, a sign to be celebrated, a joyful sign of your fertility. This isn't in this story. The woman who produces a baby never menstruated at all got pregnant, or got pregnant. And of course you can see, can't you? I hope you can all see how realistic this is, because if you just imagine a society, it's an oscillating society. The moon is your clock, and the sun, of course, but the moon and the sun are the two clocks. The sun does the daily alternation between light and dark, as well as the seasonal alternation. The moon does the waxing and waning. In such a society, as a man, can you see that you would never see your wife's pregnancy? You would never see your wife's menstruation. Those things would be what you'd experience back with your own kin, your own mother and sister, and you'd be involved in their blood and their babies. But your wife will be somebody who you have sex with. And you might just turn up one day, oh, there's a baby here, because you weren't around during the pregnancy. So the idea that the wife suddenly has a baby, can you see from a different cultural perspective, is absolutely realistic. Oh, where did this baby come from, you might say, when you've come back to your wife after a long period of separateness, because the wife needs a bit of time to get, to be ready to have you, or getting the breastfeeding and all the rest of the things sorted. She probably isn't too keen on having sex too early. You get back to her, oh, where did that baby come from? So it's a brilliant way of describing reality, but of course not Western reality, which is why Western scientists have never made the slightest bit of sense of any of these stories.
Sorry, I'm having a bit of a problem. Going back to the sound making.
Yeah.
We see the sound making associated with women's menstruation.
Yeah.
So why is it that it's the reverse? That the frog wife can't make the noise, and the human wife can. I still don't quite get that.
Well, because it's a stitch up. I mean, because the whole thing is an artificial patriarchal stitch up, constructing a fake news. It's constructing that menstruation doesn't lead to pregnancy or fertility, and you don't need these things. So it's saying that even if you've got a permanent wife, a wife that you stick with all the time, you can still perform ritual. You can still have ritual power, perform ceremonies, despite the fact that you never go back to your sister and you've lost touch with the moon entirely. It's because that's what's
and the moon is appropriating that with the laughter. It's like it's a male appropriation of that, which would associate to the ceremonies.
Okay, but then why is it that the son's the human wife is able to make the noise?
Well, someone's going to make the noise, and see what I mean. What we've got to remember is that the result of this whole stitch up is that sun and moon are together in the same household, just as frog wife and human wife are together in the same household. So you've got a man in both his aspects. I mean, let me put it this way. I want to start with the man and then go to the woman. What you've got now, where you used to have man as brother alternating with man as husband, and man and woman as sister alternating with woman as wife, you've now got the all-purpose wife stuck for all purposes with the all-purpose husband who is also your brother. So what's happening is that, okay, with under patriarchy, what do you want from your wife? You want, of course, sex, but you also want all the things which in the past your sister might have done for you, like provide children or provide, I don't know, provide clothing, all sorts of nice things which two categories of women would have provided in turn, but very different types of services. Once you've got no sister left and all you've got is a wife and you've abandoned your sister, you want your sister you want your wife to be a sister as well. You want an all-purpose wife. But of course, the all-purpose wife is now stuck with an all-purpose husband, a husband who is not just her sexual partner, but also her, quotes, protector, which in the past her brother would have been. So it's like, can you see what's happening? It's like, because you've got an all-purpose wife, you want to be sure that that all-purpose wife, that permanent wife, can still enable you to have the kind of ritual power you used to have when periodically you'd go back with your sister. So you've got to prove your permanent wife can produce a noise with her mouth, but of course that's actually her vagina. It's a euphemism for that.
Am I taking it too far now, going back to the previous 2 sessions, thinking that also the way they produce this fake news is that they try to make frog woman eat cooked food and make a noise with cooked food?
Yeah, exactly. That's right.
Brilliant.
That's exactly right. Yeah, yes. And in fact, I mean, we won't be able to do it this year, but there's another amazing, wonderful story, the hunter Mon Maneki and his wives, where the same things kind of happen, where the husband goes up and down, chooses a high wife, a low wife, high wife, a low wife, food, anti-food, food, anti-food, and you have the low wives having to eat hot pepper and burning their mouths, and also everything which could go wrong goes wrong for womankind. Put it that way. Under this new system, you're always in the wrong place at the wrong time, and you can see this poor frog wife. So the reason she's furious and refusing to do anything is she shouldn't be there in the first place. She should be down in the other world with her kin, with her brother, with her mother, with her sisters. She shouldn't be stuck there with her in-laws when she's menstruating. But of course, under patriarchal marriage, a woman is stuck. You might not feel at all like being with your husband. I mean, why do you want to all the time to be washing his socks and providing him with meals? There might be lots of times you want to go on strike, but you're a wife, a permanent wife. You're not allowed to go on strike. Doesn't matter whether you're menstruating or childbirth or what, that's not allowed anymore. But the husband wants it both ways, because he also wants the things he used to get from his sister, all this ritual potency. And so you set up a huge constructed nonsense, fake news ritual to prove that you can get away with all this nonsense. And so these patriarchal myths are, but that's what they are. They're ways of achieving that transition. They're rather like Stonehenge, in the sense that Stonehenge, as we know from Lionel's work, Lionel Sims I'm talking about now, were huge monuments designed to manage that risk-laden, ever so shaky, difficult transition from the moon to the sun, from a relatively egalitarian social system to a starkly patriarchal one.
I was thinking about the tripe, the cooked food as well, that she eats charcoal, and traditionally you eat charcoal because you're poisoned. You use charcoal to get rid of poison, and then it kind of splits and it's black and it pours out. So yeah, I think it's poison to her, isn't it, as the frog kind of thing. So she's eating charcoal to try and make the noise, but she's also trying to get rid of the poison that she's having to eat cooked food.
Oh, that's interesting, Leoncia. Yes, that's very interesting. I'd never thought of that, I have to admit. I haven't thought of the charcoal is that way.
I don't know.
Sure, I know it sounds very likely, because she doesn't eat it. It all gets splurched out again, which you'd expect from trying to use the charcoal to soak up some poison. Yes, okay, that's interesting. That's very, very interesting. Yeah.
Have we finished the gynecology lesson? Have we done enough on that?
I hope so. Now, I was just wondering, what do we want to do now? Because I mean, we've still got a bit of time. We've got quite a lot of time, actually. When do we start?
There are some good questions in the chat, but do you want to sum up and round off with this, and then look at some of the questions?
Well, all right, okay. A couple of things then. First of all, just you could hardly credit the pathetic interpretation that Lévi-Strauss comes across in dealing with this story. I mean, it is just so tragic, and you'll agree with me as soon as I read it out. He says, what lesson do we derive from the two wives or the two wounds motif? What do the myths proclaim, he says, and he answers, this is his answer, that it is wicked and dangerous to confuse the physical differences between women with the specific differences separating animals from humans, or animals from each other. Social life demands that as human beings, women whether beautiful or ugly, all deserve to obtain husbands. The myths, says Lévi-Strauss, they're stressing this egalitarian morality, even though in doing so they cannot but reveal a mysterious fact that society tries to ignore. All human females are not equal, for nothing can prevent them from being different from each other in their animal essence, which means they are not all equally desirable to prospective husbands. I mean, can you be any more dismal? He doesn't even get that the frog wife is a woman in seclusion. He thinks she's just literally ugly. And then he says, let's face it, some women are ugly, but we've got to try to be nice to them anyway. And that's despite the fact that the entire book is all about the moon. I mean, honestly, if we go through the origin of table manners and look at the index, the number of entries under the moon is just almost, well, astronomical is a silly pun, but I mean, it's just so many entries. And he talks about the lunar aspect of these stories about the frog wife and all this stuff. And yet when it comes to this story, he's such a patriarch that he's kind of immunized himself against its lessons. So anyway, and then I suppose I just wanted to get back to the final bit. So okay, I'll just read out now from Lévi-Strauss and then I'll stop. This is his conclusion, and it's conclusion of the entire 4-volume work on North and South American mythology, but specifically related to this myth, because he says, the veil lifts to reveal a vast mythological system common to both South and North America. That is the first time he's really told us what the stories are about. And have you noticed that this passage never gets quoted? Yet all his textbooks on structuralism, all his incredibly theoretical commentaries, nobody ever notices what he actually says about how the veil lifts and what it reveals. The veil lifts to reveal a vast mythological system common to both South and North America, and in which the subjection of women is the basis of the social order. We can now understand the reason for this. The human wife, he's referring to this story, the human wife's parents-in-law are not content just to present her with domestic utensils and teach her the correct way to use them. The old man also proceeds to carry out a veritable shaping of his daughter-in-law. In her pristine innocence, she did not have monthly periods and gave birth suddenly and without warning. The transition from nature to culture demands that the feminine organism should become periodic, since the social as well as the cosmic order would be endangered by a state of anarchy in which regular alternation of day and night, the phases of the moon, feminine menstruation, the fixed period for pregnancy, and the course of the seasons did not mutually support each other. And so he continues, so he's explaining patriarchy now. So it is as periodic creatures that women are in danger of disrupting the orderly working of the whole universe. Their social insubordination, often referred to in the myths, is an anticipation in the form of the rule of women of the infinitely more serious danger of their physiological insubordination. Therefore, women have to be subjected to règles and the rules instilled into them by their upbringing, like those imposed on them, even at the cost of their subjection by a social order willed and evolved by men, are the pledge and symbol of other rules, the physiological nature which bears witness to the correspondence between social and cosmic rhythms, in which Lévi-Strauss is just identifying with the ideologues constructing this nonsense. He really does think that women couldn't synchronize their periods. They were hopeless at it. And in order to establish culture and order, men had to teach women menstrual synchrony.
Not just menstrual synchrony, but well, I mean, I don't even think he's addressing menstrual synchrony there, but the periodicity of menstruation. He's saying that it's men who make menstruation lunar.
Synchrony in the sense that it makes women synchronize
because it's
with the moon. So I mean, right. Yeah, but there are plenty of places in where he does explicitly. There's plenty of myths where the heroine says, "Wherever I go, all the women menstruate together." So I mean, and then what Lévi-Strauss says as well. Yes, this is a well-known mythological motif that women can synchronize with the moon, and therefore through the moon synchronize with each other. But of course, you're right. it's kind of in a way worse and deeper than that. Even the very fact that women sort of are periodic has to be something instilled into women by male teaching. Yeah. So, I mean, the depths to which patriarchal ideology can go in our own disciplines, including anthropology, are remarkable. I mean, really remarkable. And it's such a tragedy that Lévi-Strauss, on the one hand, says, listen to these stories, learn from them, respect them, but somehow can't quite manage it himself. Sorry, Camilla.
Yeah, it just, Rosalie is making the extremely important point that when Lévi-Strauss says règle, that means periods and rules. It is both senses in the French.
Thank you.
So it's quite important that.
Sorry, I said règle very loud so that everyone could get it.
Règle means women's periods as well as meaning rules imposed on people. Yep. Kind of, it's a very interesting metaphor in French.
You can see where it comes from, because if you say the regularities, you can see how even in English, the regularities would be a possible word for the periods and also for the rules. But anyway.
Yeah. There's some other very good points in that perhaps would help you to just pick up and go further. Karima's asking about the Plains Indians and Arapaho. Were they matrilocal or patrilocal? They were, generally speaking, tended to be matrilineal, didn't they? In many groups.
Nearly all the Plains Indians, I mean, one or two exceptions, the Ojibwa weren't, but nearly all the Plains Indians were matrilineal and matrilocal. In fact, sort of matrilocal. Of course, they were, ever since they got the horses from the Spaniards, they were very mobile, so they wouldn't have been necessarily settled into matrilineal lineages exactly, but there's no question they were.
So can we clarify what's going on here with this potato plant? Because some people are suggesting, is this an impact of colonialism? Is this an impact of white conquest or a shift in the history? Do we know about what this is? This story talking about something historic? Or what are we talking about here?
Can anyone help me out there? Because I'm not really sure. Obviously, the potatoes are an Amerindian invention, but they come from Peru, not from North America. But I mean, they must have percolated their way up. And all kinds of things sort of domesticated initially in South America found their way to the Iroquois and other North American groups. But as for the potato in this part, among the Plains Indians, who was it just said to us he thought that the whites had introduced?
That was me.
Yeah. Have you got any evidence for that? Are you sure about that?
The Plains tribes didn't grow anything. They didn't grow corn. They didn't grow anything. After they got the horse, and after they moved down into that land, they would, pick some stuff up that was growing up along the creeks, and that was it to supplement the buffalo that they ate all the time, and it's some fish. They weren't growing anything. In fact, they thought that doing that would, made you an inferior.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And so when they're talking about growing. That, from what I see, this story is talking about things being out of balance, because when they switch wives, it's like switching the black dot to the black half of the yin yang, and so that's what the base of it is. That things have been thrown out of balance by changing their lifestyle from what they did, which was the horse culture. Every once in a while raiding each other for more horses.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. But this story could be going back before horses. It might be talking about earlier.
Well, I don't think the story could be. I would agree that the underlying grammar goes right back to the origins of human culture, but the story sounds to me relatively recent. I don't know, just because of the potatoes, I suppose.
You have to take into account that.
Did the Plains Indians practice bride service?
Practice which now?
Bride service.
This story is certainly indicating that, but whether that's true in sort of ethnographic detail, I'm not sure. The story is certainly saying when the two brothers say they're away all the time, as Ian suggested, that must mean they're seeing their wives. So that implies, of course, bride service. But how ethnographically true that is, I'm not totally sure, actually. But Denise,
if you were a good hunter,
Denise
you
had
would
a
you might have 4 or 5 wives, and they might be even siblings.
yes, okay, you'd have to be a very good hunter.
Denise had a point.
Yeah, go on, Denise.
Well, I put it in the chat that potatoes are associated with the moon because they're tubers and they grow under the ground, and they're associated with toads as well. So you've got a transformation thing, I think, going on rather than the structural analysis.
Oh, well done. I didn't know that. I didn't know that underground things are wet. I suppose they're damp and dark, and therefore, yeah. And of course, the moon comes down and gets damp and dark inside you. And I suppose you can draw all those parallels. Yes. Yeah. 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 Thanks. That's great. I hope you forget it.
One other thing to perhaps mention, Chris, is the link to Sundance, or say a bit more on so-called Sundance, perhaps.
Yes, certainly, yes.
How is this story linked?
Yes, okay. So I just knew I decoded the story in a way that Lévi-Strauss failed to do, and I'm afraid I never felt too much able to do anything much with it. It was in my PhD. Eventually, I published this analysis in the JRAI, but not, obviously it sank like a lead balloon, as everything does if it's not part of fake news. But anyway, so I was in the British Museum. I followed up the sources that Lévi-Strauss was looking at. So let me just say, okay, what happens is, the Sundance is a sort of betwixt and between heaven and earth ritual. I mean, there's all sorts of complicated things I won't go into, but I've got some notes in front of me and I could sort of consult them, but I'll just say what stands out most for me, which is that you erect this big pole reaching up to that hole in the sky, and from it are leather thongs, and from the thongs you have these what are they called, little things like little bits of bone, skewers, and you insert these little bits of bone, sharp ends of bone, into these thongs, and you stick them into your men, of course. You stick them into your breast. Now, there's about 10 of you, and you hang from these thongs, hanging between earth and sky. And also attached to you are the skulls of buffalo, the dry bone skulls of buffalo. And you now have to walk around, throwing yourself backwards while you're sort of suspended from these thongs, obviously bleeding profusely in a huge amount of pain. But critically, you've got to keep your eyes open while staring at the sun. And the idea is that by doing all this with all your blood and defying the sun with your eyes, it can't be very good for your eyes, but they did it, you brought on the rain. And in that sense, you ensured continued periodicity. Now, to connect that with the story, I'll stop in a minute, I won't go on for too long. To connect that with the story, what happens is that the human wife, eventually she gets fed up. She wants to go back and visit her kin, and she's got a vague feeling where the hole in the sky might have been. Now there's a huge big potato field, and all the potato plants are doing fine, all these lovely lush, green sprouting leaves everywhere. But she's quite clever, because she notices that one particular potato plant is wilting, and she thinks, aha, I wonder why it's wilting. And of course, that's the one which hasn't got any roots, or its roots aren't in any soil, because it's just plugged into the hole in the sky. So she goes there and she pulls up the relevant potato plant, and she carefully crawls to the edge. She's on her tummy and she looks down, and she just sees this, she's just crying her eyes out. She sees this vision of this beautiful circular camp circle and the Eagle River, and all the crocodiles are singing, the insects are buzzing, the people are singing. She's longing to be back home. So she collects blankets, and she sits surreptitiously, when her husband's not looking, she collects these blankets, and ties the blankets into knots, as you would if you're escaping from a burning building. And she manages to get enough blankets, she thinks, to let her down to the ground. She ties the one end of the blanket round a tree stump, and with her baby, she starts to unravel the blanket and find her way down, 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 down. The trouble is the blanket wasn't quite long enough. she's suspended from the earth, as it so happens, exactly the height of a very tall tree. In fact, the exact same height as the tall tree used in the sun dance. And she's just hanging there, hanging there, hanging there. She's hanging there so long that her husband up in the sky wonders where she's gone. And he gets a bit suspicious. He thinks, I know where she's gone. I'm going to look at that potato plant. And he finds the hole in the sky, finds the blankets tied to the tree, and he looks down. And he doesn't just see the Eagle River and the camp, he also sees his wife and her baby dangling this tree height above the ground. So what does he do? He takes a very large round stone and he holds it, he sort of carefully holds it till it's absolutely sure that it's vertical above her head. And he drops it and it kills her. She falls to the ground, and the baby, who has another whole sequence of adventures, is sort of suckling off the rotting flesh of his mum, and is a bit of a hero because he manages to survive. But I'll just end by saying that when the men are doing the sun dance and hanging from the sky, they're taking the role of the human woman who returned back home because she wanted to get back so much. I've only given you a fraction of it all. Really, we want much more. And I've actually got here. In fact, in my article in the JRAI, I've got a fair bit more of it, because there's all sorts of extraordinarily lunar comings and goings during the sun dance, including illicit sex around dark moon when the woman's menstruating. I mean, I say illicit in the sense of it's not very patriarchal.
It's ritual, yeah, it's magic.
Yeah.
Okay, so do we have more questions, more general questions? There's quite a lot of stuff on potatoes and the sun, which is all very interesting. Anybody any other thoughts or questions about this whole thing? Does it sound convincing, Chris's argument, or?
Could you not say then, Chris, that in the Sundance rain dance, because they want to bring on the rain, and the sun is too hot and they're squinting at it, that there's a need to have a toad wife for the sun, so that it can bring on the rainy part, and it's a transformation of the sun back to the moon in that sense.
Very, very interesting. Yes, I wonder. Yes, I suppose so. But as long as we realise that we have an all-purpose husband who's performing the brother functions, and an all-purpose wife now who's performing the sister functions, so the moon is sort of merged with sun into a singular thing, as opposed to a periodic alternation between two types of male, just as the two types of female have been united. I mean, what we certainly got, Denise, is a loss of lunar periodicity. The idea that the sun might need to be tempered by the frog wife is interesting, except that was never the case before. I mean, they seem to have managed perfectly well. Countless hunter-gatherer societies seem to manage perfectly well without getting things that way round. So it's interesting that these people who are doing these other extraordinarily, I don't know, extravagant and painful, and probably not too, in some ways, not too healthy things, not too healthy for your eyes, I would have thought, but I'm just saying, we need to explain why at this particular moment, along with potatoes, things began to put things around that way. I'm always a bit suspicious about trying to be positive about everything. I mean, some things are not good, and some things are quite good. And looking at anything, any society, and saying it's all wonderful. I'm not saying you're doing that at all, Denise, and it's very good to look for the positives. It's very, very important. But I'm not sure how positive it is for a frog to be married to the sun. I think it's probably very unfortunate for any frog to be out there and getting far too hot and dry.
But you could say that the toad is so hot, so wet that it pushes the sun back to the.
That's a brilliant thought. If the toad was monstrous enough, it could do that. I'm sure. Yes. Yes. Yeah. And of course, the Aztecs were trying to do something similar, weren't they? I mean, they were trying to get the sun to darken and bring rain by having not just any old blood, but by having living hearts of slaves who've have their chests open so that the heart's actually palpitating. Now that should be very wet and bloody, and that should do it. That should deal with the sun.
Not slaves. The people who were sacrificed generally came from the other tribes, but they were the elites of those tribes. And the Aztecs had these things called the Flowery Wars, where they had taken over pretty much everything. And in the Flowery Wars, they would go out and they would have these fake battles where they captured, they didn't kill, the young warrior sons of the elites. They would bring them back, and these warrior children were sacrificed. And the talk is that the thigh meat of these warrior children was given to the warriors who captured them.
I stand corrected.
The what was given?
The thigh meat.
Thigh meat?
Yes. And that's interesting too, because the thigh meat was given
right.
in the Old Testament. So the thigh meat of the lamb was given to the priests who sacrificed them. Only the left thigh, the right thigh went to God.
The meat from the left thigh of the elite son from the conquered tribe would be eaten.
Well, I got them mixed up. I spoke wrong. That in the biblical story, the left thigh went to the priest, and the right thigh went to God. But the thigh meat of the warriors who captured in the Aztecs, who did the capturing, went to the warriors who captured them, and so they would get both thighs, I guess, and if it was only one of them.
I stand corrected, but I still feel that I wasn't that far from the mark, because I think those tribes, had they managed to ward off the Aztecs, would have preferred to stay alive and not get their thighs eaten at all myself. So there's different ways of having slavery, including wage slavery, which look fairly non-violent and they're quite subtle, but they do the same job.
That's why they hooked up with Cortez.
Yes, I understand some of that. I haven't made any. I'm very pleased, Manchego, you're able to tell us about that. It's brilliant. It's wonderful, because I haven't, obviously, none of us can know too much about everything. So I'm horribly, shamefully ignorant about all that.
If there's also I kept thinking while we were doing this story that encoded in the Old Testament, in the Jacob cycle, towards its middle, is a story where I think you can see where patriarchy and matriarchy are switching. Jacob is up living with his mama's brother, and he gets the 2 wives from him, but his mama's brother won't give him any allow him any herds of his own. He has to work his herds. So he gets a scheme together, and he takes the 2 daughters with him, along with some sheep.
These are daughters of his mother's brother, right?
Daughters of his mother's brother. They're his wives. She's given the wrong wife first by trickery. He's in the dark tent. He doesn't know which it is, and he wants Rachel, and he gets Leah given to him by his first. And then he says, well, if you work for me for another 7 years, sorry, you worked for him 7 years, then I will give you my other daughter, Rachel, the one you really want.
Yeah.
So he does.
Mm-hmm.
When they're leaving, they're going to leave in the middle of the night because her brothers are, sort of upset by all the favor that he's getting. Rachel, the favored daughter, the younger one, she goes and she takes her father's it says in the Bible, household gods, or the word is teraphim. Teraphim there's a really ancient Neolithic cult whereby you bury your ancestors' skulls under your floorboards. The teraphim are now known, and Josephus says this too, and he says that it continued into his time, where the teraphim were then used as oracles, and you would put a coin in its mouth, and you would have it hanging on the wall, and it would be your great 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 grandfather or something, and it would prophesy for you.
Yeah.
These so she takes these teraphim, and her father then chases them, catches them, and she's in the tent, and she hides them under her skirt. But the father comes in to, to look. Actually, Jacob doesn't know this, and he takes it. But see, there's no teraphim in here, only your daughter, and she's alone in that tent. And she says, "I'm sorry, Father, I can't stand for you, that I am on my period." Whether she was lying or not is not true. If she wasn't lying, then she's just ritually destroyed the objects. If she was lying, she gets to keep them.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, ever so slightly off topic, but then sometimes I go, it's ever so slightly on. No, it's interesting. No. Sorry.
Okay, you've got a logic of bride service, 7 years for the wives, and I don't know if that is a point where that switches. I don't remember my Bible adequately at all.
Well, then they're heading down to back to where his father's people were, his own place, down at Beersheba.
Right. Okay. So he's going to be patrilocal.
Yeah. When he cheats his brother out of his birthright, he splits. He knows he's about to be killed, so he splits for his mama's people, and he lives with them for 20 years.
Okay. Yeah, there's something there. Yeah. Okay, have we got any more? I think we're going to be winding up now, unless we've got some further comments. There's been a lot of discussion about toads. Does anybody want to say any more about toads? Denise, do you want to say something about toads? Because I think Tanya was most interested in the toads.
No, it's just that in the Andes, the Virgin Earth, the Pachamama is often portrayed as a toad. Hold on a minute, my phone is ringing. Hang on, sorry.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
I also kind of know a thing or two about this. I don't want to get too off topic on there's so many layers of meaning and everything in these types of stories, but in the Southwest and especially Central America, toads are really big. There's a lot of debate about this amongst archaeologists, but frequently they will find these pits in archaeological sites that are full of toad bones. And there's a lot of theories about it, about whether or not it's accidental and they just have pits that toads are falling into and dying. But there's good evidence that there's some kind of ritual behavior that's going on surrounding toads. And in Central America, there are ethnographic reports of people having pits in their houses with toads being kept almost like captives in these pits. And I don't know what the this ritual significance of that is, but there is definitely some kind of almost like fetishism around toads. And I mean, also toads are they're poisonous, they're toxic.
Yeah.
They have venom glands. And in China, for example, they use that venom medicinally. But one of the effects of the compound is that it causes you to have tear production, saliva, it causes you to leak. basically. So there's kind of these connections. Yeah, there's all sorts of weird things going on around toads that we don't really understand why they're, we don't really know what the deal is in North America with toads. But I mean, they have sites where there's toad bones found in North America, or in Appalachia, Central America, all over the place. So
have you come across, I mean, I've come across plenty of it, but have you come across the idea that when a woman's menstruating, in some metaphorical sense, she becomes a toad, which would then mean that toads have got those properties of being sort of poisonous and fertile and wet and all those things?
No, this is the first I'm hearing about any of that. Yeah, I just have been kind of running into this sort of motif of toads over and over again.
This story isn't by no means the only one where a woman who, when she's on her period, turns into a frog or a toad. The Stephen Hugh Jones, two anthropologists, Stephen and Christine Hugh Jones, wrote a marvelous 2-volume ethnography of the Barasana Indians. These are South American Indians, and I mean, it was just kind of the normal thing in any story. If a woman turns into a toad, she's on her period, and you can see how metaphorically it makes beautiful sense. So I have a feeling that that's the root of all these cults about toads that you're talking about. Because menstrual blood is kind of, you mustn't touch it, and if it does touch you, it'll do all sorts of harm. And of course, the poisonous nature of the toad's venom fits that, as do other forms of poison. Because snakes are often linked to menstrual synchrony, and dragons and stuff with different forms of, venom and poison. Of course.
Well, I think archaeologists tend to get really confused by this type of thing because they don't analyze the ethnography as much. They're more just looking at it. I just know that it's a big debate over here in North America where archaeologists are confused.
Yeah. Archaeologists are always confused because they refuse to learn anything at all from any kind of ethnography.
But it's fascinating what Kieran's saying about these pits. That is absolutely fascinating. Denny, you got interrupted. Did you want to say anything from South America?
No, it's just a lot of it comes up in the chat. I mean, the toads here in the Andes are associated with the rains. There are similar stories about toad women as kind of menstrual figures and so on. So there's a lot of consistency between North America and South America in that sense.
I have a question. I don't know if it's been discussed before. So how does that then translate into our Western things? Is the woman kissing the toad into a prince because she's ready to do it?
It's very funny in Aymara language because the word for toad is hampatu, and it's the same word for a kiss. So there's a kind of joke that Aymara people, when they kiss, they're like toads.
How amazing, how marvelous. I mean, all those magical spells cast by witches, the one thing they absolutely do, they stop you being married. In other words, they stop you being in a marital relationship. And whether you turn into a toad or a swan, as in Swan Lake, or all these various other creatures, obviously there are reasons why those particular creatures are chosen. But I mean, in order for a young man to start having a lovely time with his sweetheart, he's got to stop being a toad. There's not much question about that. So, I mean, yes, I mean, I suppose the idea there is just that you don't have to be female to be a toad. I mean, it's a similar kind of spell, because you're right that, in European fairy tales, it's a sort of...
Ed, did you want to say something about Lionel mentioning connection with Stonehenge? Do you want to say anything about that? No, okay, he's not that. He just said that in Lionel's analysis of, I thought it was the analysis of Avebury and Silbury Hill, but maybe I'm wrong. I was wondering if Ed could remember. Oh, he's outside. Okay, we'll leave that for now. But there are many, many connections with Toad. People are saying Toad is Divine Mother. We think that the origination of that is this characterization of toads as the menstruating, ritually powerful aspect of woman is where it is. And in these Amerindian stories, this relationship of the woman to the moon as the trickster is very powerful, the clinging woman and so forth. So that gets, it reverberates around mythology all over the world, I'm sure. But it would be a big project for people to consider many more aspects of toad symbolism, because they are obviously good to think with about menstruation, so they connect up very powerfully. If I think we're running quite late now, so
can I just say that was all brilliant. Can I just say that was all brilliant? But I do hope that we don't focus too narrowly on just the toad. I mean, I hope you sort of agree with me that this myth is telling us an enormous amount about how patriarchy became established, what the costs were, what the sort of critical mechanisms were, and how it connects with that beautiful question, which is the centerpiece of the Two Davids book, The Dawn of Everything. How it's like a beautiful map as to the mechanisms through which we became stuck. So as soon as a woman is stuck in marriage, it kind of kills all the other periodicities. And as Lévi-Strauss points out, the fear is that even the changing of the seasons, so the alternation between waxing and waning moon and the movement of the tides, all the periodicities which characterize our living planet are under threat when you kill that periodicity. And it seems to me that this story, perhaps more clearly than so many others, but they all say it pretty loud and clear, is telling us something, because we do need periodicity. It is the secret of life. All life is things which breathe in and breathe out, which sleep and wake again, which die and reborn. Without those periodicities, this planet isn't a living planet, and we have started to kill all those periodicities, and it's a warning sign. And to me, these stories are kind of telling us something very important, and it's about toads, but it's about quite a lot more than toads.
Thank you for running that as a workshop, Chris. You're right. It worked like a lot. You know, no better, very differently.
Yes. Yes. So, thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. People, it did begin to work. It was good to do.
Yep. Okay. So thanks everybody, and can I announce next week?
Next week we have a talk from a researcher who's done a lot of work with the Hadza. He's quite a young researcher, but he's done work with the Hadza in East Africa on issues of share. Sorry? With the Hadza in East Africa, and he's done work on sharing, on egalitarianism, and next week this is Duncan Stibbard-Hawkes, is going to talk about the revolution will not be fossilized. The idea being that what would we actually see in terms of the remnants or the remains, in terms of the archaeology or the behavior that can't be fossilized in human revolution. So he's going to use examination of hunter-gatherer material culture and show that to a very large extent, African hunter-gatherer material culture, well, it simply wouldn't, you wouldn't have anything left, basically. Apart from, of course, certain interesting categories, which Ian Watts knows very much about in terms of pigments. So that talk should be very interesting, and it talks to the question of the Afro species, particularly, and hawks. The revolution will not be fossilized.
Thanks, Camilla. Thank you, everybody. See you next week. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.